Okay, hi Byte Wellness fam. Great to have you all back. I love that we're seeing some of our newer faces, some of our newer names coming back, and then we've got our oldies but goodies and our friends of the community. Um, really incredible. So we're back for another Byte Wellness Wednesday, and we're picking up where we left off in terms of talking about free and added sugars, like looking for high quality sugars. And, I'd love to just start as we usually do with our discussion questions. These are the questions that you would have gotten on Sunday if you're officially a member of the community where you're getting daily wellness text messages. This would have come to you on Sunday. I think not everyone here is necessarily a daily wellness text member, but we opened up the webinars for this month in honor of Women's History Month, last month in honor of Black History Month. So welcome. I'm so glad that you guys are taking advantage of a chance to learn and invest in yourself. So those of you who are getting the daily text messages on Sunday, you will have gotten this message. It read, if you are someone who sweetens your smoothies, oh, I read that wrong. If you are someone who sweetens tea and coffee and maybe even your smoothies, where did you learn that habit? If you don't sweeten any of those habitually, how did you learn not to sweeten? So we started having this conversation yesterday. I think Miss Lisa even volunteered an answer last week that's sort of related to this conversation. But I would love for you all to kick it off. Does anyone want to kick off the discussion? We talked about sweetening tea and coffee and how sometimes you actually just decide to spend your calories, spend your carbs on other things that you think you'll enjoy a little bit more. Um, but I see some new folks here, like Miss Iveta. Are you someone who usually sweetens drinks?
Well, I used to use six sugars in my coffee, and I used to drink lots of OJ, and I never drink water. So, I like sugars and cookies and candies. But then my A1C was elevated, and I told myself, there's no way I'm going to allow myself to be diabetic because I don't like needles. And so I cut back on my sugar by going from six sugars to two sugars. Plus, I used to like to drink Mountain Dew and Pepsi, and just all the bad, unhealthy stuff. And so I kind of cut back on those things. And then when I became a health and wellness coach and an entrepreneur in the products that I use, detoxing and taking the products, it helps me to stop using sugar. I stopped using sugar because it takes the craves away.
Wow.
It takes the craves away from sugar and it depresses my appetite. So I have no desire for adding sugars in my coffee or in my oatmeal or anything like that. So the products I use does help tremendously.
That's
And,
excellent. That sounds
and
like,
I've
oh,
lost
sorry,
over
go ahead.
and I've lost over 30 pounds.
Lost 30 pounds. Isn't it amazing what cutting sugar will do? It sounds like you made other shifts in your diet, but man,
Yes.
that cutting out sugar, so many hidden calories that we just don't even realize we're drinking. That's incredible. Congratulations on making that transition. In general, cutting back on
Thank
free
you.
and added sugars is a really big deal. I'm glad you were able to find a way that works for you, and that it's having a sort of holistic effect, right? You've lost weight, you mentioned elevated blood sugar. So I assume that with weight loss and with cutting back on sugar, your blood sugar has improved too.
Yes, definitely. No more
Excellent.
pre-diabetic. I'm perfectly well.
Oh, congratulations. That
Much
is so hard
healthier.
to do.
Much healthier and feeling much better. But be honest with you, I could not have done it without taking the products that I'm taking. That's what helps a lot.
I see. What are you taking, Miss Iveta?
Okay, so I'm taking total life changes products. I've been an entrepreneur for going on 5 years. So I detoxes my body with I ask for detox tea, which takes the toxins out of my body. And I also use the NutriBurst multi-liquid vitamins, which has all the vitamins that your body needs. And it also absorbed at 98% in your body. It gives me energy. It makes me feel really, really good in my body. And for example, I used to be a person who has pain in my body, going up the steps, waking up in the morning, I would have pains in my body because of the inflammation that's in my body. And once I start detoxing and taking these products, the pain has been gone. And I'm going to be 60 in a few months, and I felt like I'm 40. I really feel good, and I'm really feeling good.
Well,
Always.
that's
And
good to hear. You sound like you're feeling good. You
yes,
sound like you're doing really well. And again, here, my role is not to tell you guys what to do or what not to do or to promote a program at all. My role is just to help you understand what science has to say about how your health risks and your wellness goals are tied to habits, and then figure out what psychology has to say about helping you shift those habits. So I'm glad that you were able to find um, a method that's helped you to cut back on sugar and lose weight and get your blood sugar under control. There are all sorts of methods. We all have to weigh those health risks, weigh our general risk threshold in order to decide uh, what exactly we're going to try.
yes.
Let's see. And Lisa adds in the chat, Miss Lisa J adds, that's fantastic. So Miss Yvetta, we are all rooting for you. This is just amazing.
Thank you.
So thank you for sharing that. I do want to go back to the first question, which is, so you mentioned that you drank orange juice, right? So the free sugars, and
Yes,
then you used quite a bit of sugar, the 6 packets in your coffee
yes,
initially. And
yes.
so the first question is really like, where did you pick up that habit? Because it's really helpful, I think, for all of us individually and then as a community to sort of look at where these habits came from. Is it family? Is it a different social influence like friends? Um,
Well,
what do you think?
I used to work night shifts, and so at the
Mm,
hospital there's always juice and free stuff. At
mhm.
least when years ago. So we always have orange OJ and cranberry juice and cookies. I work at Lake Forest, so it's a rich area, so they always have free stuff. And so I picked up the habits of drinking the juice. So when I'm thirsty, I get OJ with ice. And so I also work at Lutheran General, and that's what I would do until when the doctor told me about my A1C. I said, no, I have to stop. And then I started to drink water and cut out those things.
Wow. So
So
that's
working night shift can be very unhealthy because you eat to stay awake. You do not eat for health. You eat to stay awake, and that's kind of damaging.
That's such a good point, right? So our habits can shift based on circumstance. Um, we got to be aware of how different stages in our lives, different shifts in like job location or work timing, like you said, working the night shift sort of shifted the way that you even thought about food and drink, and you were eating and drinking just to stay awake and to pass the time probably. I've worked
Yes.
my fair share of hospitalist night shifts. I know how that is. Um, so yeah, you're absolutely dead on that that can be uh, one of the drivers of some of our less healthy behaviors. But like you said, once you recognize the health risks involved in continuing that habit, then you just make a shift. And I love that you were able to take charge of your your metabolic health, really your overall well-being, and just make that shift and start drinking more water and cut out those free and added sugars. Thank you for sharing. That's really powerful.
You're so welcome.
Does anyone else have any? And I just, as I say this, I want to welcome Miss Aura to the chat. Good to see you, Miss Aura. Does anyone else want to add um, to the question of, I'll repeat this for you, Miss Aura. If you are someone who sweetens your tea or coffee or smoothies, where did you learn that habit from? And if you're someone who doesn't, where did that habit come from? Anyone want to add on to Miss Ivetta's really illuminating answer? If not, you all know I'm always happy to volunteer. Um, this is a safe space, no judgment, right? So, let's see. I grew up in a household that was really focused on nutrition, which probably had a lot to do with why I'm talking to you now and why um, I became a doctor who, even though we don't learn a lot of nutrition in medical school, who did a bunch of extra training to be able to teach these topics. So my parents were focused on nutrition, and we didn't have a lot of added sugars growing up. In fact, when I was really young, there was this joke that, like in the family, that whenever anyone came over our house and they drank juice or asked for juice, like orange juice, they hated it because my parents would dilute it. Like we never just drank juice straight because they recognized, even back then, uh, many decades ago, that I don't even know if they would have called them free sugars, but they recognized that this is just more sugar than kids or adults need on a regular basis. So, family would come to the house and you get like maybe 4 ounces of orange juice, and all the rest is just filled with water. We didn't get store-bought cookies. My mom would make cookies with carob chips instead of chocolate chips. So pretty early on, I had the opportunity to develop this palate that wasn't super sweet. Now, I have developed over the years a little bit of a sweet tooth, and so I do enjoy cookies. Usually I'll make them myself so I can kind of control the quality of ingredients. Um, I do like a good pound cake or like layer cake. Um, and I told you guys this last week, especially when I'm tired or I just really need a pick me up, I might add some sort of sweetener to coffee or tea. And my default is to go for the whole food sugar. So we talked about the dates, and I showed you that example of how I mixed up the dates in my water when I make tea. But sometimes I'll put some honey or some agave, especially if I feel like I need even more of a boost. So for me, I think that habit of not automatically sweetening drinks uh, probably came from childhood. And I see in the chat that Miss Lisa says, that sounds like my mom, only 4 ounces of juice. We didn't eat sweets as much until we went to school. And she says, now I have a big sweet tooth. I wonder what's up with that, Miss Lisa, because I feel like I have a big sweet tooth too. And so I have to kind of keep it under control, because, you know, it's just not worth it. It's just not worth it. Um, Thank you for that contribution. Ms. Lisa, if you're able to come on, I would love to hear more about uh, what your childhood was like, not eating a ton of sweets, and then how that shifted when you went to school. whether it was kind of the school environment or the home environment changing, where, you know, there's all the busyness of having to get children to school, having to deal with older kids, and what parents buy, and the home environment can shift at that point. So if you're able to come on mic, I know you may not be able to. I'd love to hear that from you.
Sure. So yeah, my mom was pretty health conscious, even though I think she did have like a sweet tooth and everything. But I think she tried to kind of teach us
Uh-huh.
a little better because she read a lot. Um,
Wow.
but you know, and so we would eat, like for sweets, we would eat raisins when I was little. But of course,
Ah.
yeah, going to school, you see everybody with the candy and they were selling like the little pink cookies and different things. And so just through that exposure, um, it, you know, made us want it.
Yeah. Yeah. I hear you. I think that's probably around the time that um me and my siblings would have been introduced to all that tasty sugar. So tasty. Especially when you haven't had it for such a long time, for like so much of your childhood, to get a giant uh like honey bun. I don't know if when you went to school, I don't know if you all had those gigantic honey buns that were just like dripping in glaze. That's just like nothing my brain had ever been exposed to. Um, Sugar, you know, people talk about how sugar can be addictive, but I can understand how sugar acts on the brain the way that a drug does, because it it just like gets me wired.
And if I can say something about what you
Yeah.
just said, Dr. Lucia, was
Hmm.
you mentioned how like the honey bun was like nothing you had ever tasted.
Hmm.
And I've actually heard that they engineer the sugars and things so that they hit the taste receptors just right and keep people hooked. So it's like food isn't like just baked or crafted or whatever. It's actually engineered to have that effect on us. It's crazy.
Yes, yes, you're absolutely right. I mean, you think, I mentioned those honey buns, but we could think of, um, we can think of Twinkies, we can think of Ho-Hos, like all sorts of packaged desserts that are mass produced. And if you look at the ingredients list, most of the ingredients are not whole foods, right? Most of them are a version of a factory product. And so we call foods like that, and actually the United Nations calls foods like that ultra processed foods, because their building blocks are not food as we know it. Their building blocks really are factory products, that you couldn't access in your everyday grocery store, and that you couldn't cook with in your kitchen. And they are super sweet sugars with just the right combination of fructose and glucose in order to, just like you said, stimulate the brain in just that way that makes you want to keep coming back for more. Yeah. What's wild is that this is what we feed kids. Like from a very young age, we're conditioned to believe that this actually could be food, right? If this is what you're getting as part of your school lunch, or I think those honey buns used to be given out as part of school breakfast. And so then we almost have no hope after that, um, of making nutritional choices that are in our best interest, unless, you know, like your mother, Miss Lisa, or like you all here, you do your own reading, and uh, you do your own learning and seek out your own nutrition education, because otherwise, if we're conditioned to think that these factory foods are food, then we'll accept just about anything. That was really deep. Thank you for adding that, Ms. Lisa. Okay. Anyone else want to add their thoughts? If not, we're going to move on to the exercise for the day. I know that Miss Aura just came on, and Miss Aura, I think you may be new as a Byte Wellness Wednesday drop-in. So it's really good to see you.
Well, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you
Okay.
just fine.
Okay.
How are you?
I'm doing fine, thank you. And you?
Good. Pretty good. I'm really excited to see all of your wonderful names and to hear your friendly voices. So I'm really glad you could join us, Miss Aura. Do you
I'm
have
enjoying
any...
it. Yeah, it's great.
Good. Do you have any thoughts on this question that we're sort of kind of doing a roundtable discussion on this question of whether you tend to sweeten your tea or coffee or your smoothies, and where that habit came from? We're really just looking back to our childhood or our shifts in work environment or our friend circles, and really examining how we develop our palate and our flavor preferences.
Well, when I was a child at home, we didn't eat a lot of sweets. We didn't. We had our basic meal. And I don't know when the candy came to play because we didn't always have desserts after eating. So we didn't eat a lot of sweets. And so let's see now with the tea, um, I don't know what, um, I don't know why. We just didn't eat a lot of sweets. And so I did sweeten my tea with
Mm-hmm.
regular sugar, but now I use stevia for my sugar.
Got it. So one of the no calorie sweeteners that is technically not an artificial sweetener. It's from the stevia leaf, the stevia plant. Wonderful. So you made an informed decision there. It sounds like at some point you switched from the regular sugar to the stevia. What made you do that?
I guess Lamar was talked a lot about, sugar and all. And that I
Ah,
think he influenced me.
okay. Okay. And for the group, Lamar's a partner.
Yes.
Yes, Dr. Woost.
And this is Lamar. Okay, wonderful. Hi, Mr. Lamar. How are you?
I'm good.
Good, good, good. Okay, well, it's really great to have both of you on. All right. So, you mentioned a really good point, Miss Aura. I feel like I planted you guys in the audience, but I promise I didn't, because we covered we covered some of the main topics that we discussed, right? Some of the main factors that influence both our taste preferences and our development of our palate, and then our habits around uh, adding sugar, eating sugary foods, etc. So we went like back to the cradle, right? We talked about how our childhood experiences develop our flavor palate. And, you know, I want to say, I haven't read this study recently, but I want to say it's potentially in the first 4 years of life, I think, that your flavor palette is developed. So for kids who are drinking juice from a bottle or from their sippy cup really early, they're going to be more inclined to want sugary foods later on in life. It doesn't mean that they can't shift habits, but it means that it's going to be a little bit harder, right? Those vegetables are not going to taste as good because they just can't compare to all that sugar, all the free sugars from from juice that they've been getting. So really early in life, when our parents set us up on the right track, we go to school and we get exposed to candy and honey buns and all the stuff that the school system promotes, and all the stuff that our friends happen to bring to school with them. And then, you try to do the best that you can, but then there are life events like shifting to night shift, having a particularly stressful work schedule. We all, can probably think of times in our lives where you're busier than you've ever been, and it's just that much harder to cook meals from scratch, or to even write DIY desserts. And so you end up grabbing the packaged food that usually has a bit more sugar in it, and refined carbs generally. And then, I mean, Miss Ora, you gave us a glimmer of sunshine, though, some hope here,
Oh,
in
really?
that, our social networks aren't always bringing us down, like those kids in elementary school just feeding us candy left and right. Our social networks can also be helpful from a health and nutrition perspective, and kind of push us to make decisions that are more in favor of our health. So that's wonderful to hear that you have that influence in your life. Now, you guys remember, the reason that we're talking about this at all is that last week we talked about the difference between free and added sugars in one category, and then whole food sugars in the other category. And we talked about how the risk of eating free and added sugars is that they are more likely to spike your blood sugar. And we said that the downstream effects of having your blood sugar spiked can be pretty serious if you have prediabetes, or if you're managing, say, type 2 diabetes, where your sugar control mechanisms just don't work right. So it's not helpful to overload the body with sugar, knowing that we're not able to remove it from the blood all that well. And so our blood and all the organs and cells that blood touches are going to be bathed in these high levels of sugar for far too much time. And we said that sugar can be kind of toxic. It can lead to clogging of the blood vessels, through damage to the inner lining of the blood vessels. That can lead to heart attack and stroke. That can lead to kidney failure that eventually requires dialysis. We talked about how that high level of sugar in the blood, when it bathes the ends of your tiny little nerves, it can cause damage and cause the type of numbness in the fingers and toes that are not uncommon. That's not uncommon with type 2 diabetes, or even type 1 diabetes that's gone on for some time. And, that can eventually lead to otherwise preventable injuries, ulcers and infections of the toe, for example, that can require amputation. So the point is that, as benign as these spikes in blood sugar can be, for someone who has prediabetes or diabetes, these spikes in blood sugar caused by free sugars or added sugars can actually be pretty detrimental in the long run. But in the short run, we said, even if you don't have prediabetes or diabetes, even if your sugar clearing mechanism works well and you can get the sugar out of your blood, the problem with the sugar spike is that your body reads it as a ton of fuel. And so it stores that fuel as fat. So the spike signals, we got to put all this in storage right now. If you're at rest, if you're just kind of sitting around while you eat or drink, which is the case for most of us. We did go over the caveat that if you are moving while that sugar is being digested, taking a walk around the block, for example, or just doing high knees in your house, that the sugar is more likely to be removed from your blood and sent to your muscles so they can use them as fuel. So in that case, the sugar essentially disappears as opposed to turning into fat and cholesterol in your blood. Okay, I know we have some new names here, so I wanted to go over that overview for you guys, and we've got some old folks who were here last week and heard all of that. Does anyone have questions about what I just reviewed? There was a lot there. It's okay if you have questions.
I have a question.
Yes.
And you may just need to explain a little bit more. If I understood what you said, did you say that when a person is drinking and they are sitting down, the sugar goes through their forms into sugar, something like that? But if they're moving around, it goes into their muscles, the fuel into their muscles, and then you when you do work out, it kind of burns it. Can you please
Yes.
explain that
Yeah.
one more time, please?
Absolutely. You got it perfectly, Miss Iveta. So the deal is, when your sugar spikes in your blood, when it goes higher than normal,
Patrick,
your
listen to
body
this, Patrick.
your
I'm sorry.
body is designed to remove it from the blood. Well, how do you get sugar out of the blood? There are two main ways. The first way that the body actually prefers to do is take sugar from the blood into the muscles. But it's only really inclined to do that. It's more inclined to do that when the muscles are moving. The receptors that remove sugar from the blood and send it into the muscles, get this is wild. The receptors like shimmy to the surface. They make themselves available when muscles move. The body is so incredible. It's so beautifully engineered that when you move your muscles, you send signals to the rest of your body. I need fuel for these muscles. And the way that that signal, one of the ways that signal gets sent is that the receptors that take sugar out of the blood and feed it to the muscle make themselves more available. And then the insulin from your pancreas puts the sugar in those muscles and you use it, and it kind of disappears in that sense, right? But if you are not actively moving around say 30 minutes after you start your first bite for your meal, around the time that you're actually digesting the sugar and absorbing it into the blood, if you're not actively moving at that time, then your body sees the sugar spike and goes, whoa, we got lots of fuel, all this extra energy. Let's make sure we save it for a rainy day in case we don't have food later. And the way that the body stores energy is as fat. So instead of going to the muscles, because you're not really using your muscles, you don't need it right now, it goes to the liver where it turns into fat. Those fat particles get sent out through your blood, and that's what lands on our bodies in different areas. It can land on your hips, on your thighs, all over, right? But the more harmful place for them to land is actually right around the waist. We call that visceral fat. It's the fat that's kind of deep. It's not the fat right under your skin. It's the fat that's deep around your organs, like around the intestines, around the stomach, even around the heart. Fat forms. And that's the type of fat that increases levels of chronic inflammation and increases risk of all these otherwise preventable diseases, like high blood pressure, type 2 diabetes, heart attack, stroke, all those things. Does that make sense, Miss Iveta?
Yes, ma'am. It does make sense. That's huge. That's
Isn't it
really huge.
huge? So
Wow.
one of the things we talked about last week is that there are quite a few studies showing that if you walk for just 15 minutes, moderate intensity walking, which means you get your breathing up, but you're not necessarily out of breath, you're not necessarily sweating. You do that for 15 minutes, starting 30 minutes after your first bite. And if you do that 3 times a day after breakfast, lunch, dinner, it actually lowers 24-hour blood sugar. And
Wow.
right? And it makes sense because, again, when you get your muscles moving, those receptors shimmy to the surface and they say, give me sugar. And so if you time it just right, about what the studies recommend is about 30 minutes after your first bite of food. If you are up and walking at that point, then the receptors are at the surface asking for sugar right at the time that the sugar's being absorbed and starting to spike. And so the timing works out. So yeah, keep that in mind. If for those of us with a sweet tooth who just have to have that piece of cake, pie, gummy worms, uh, extra honey in your teeth, whatever it is, right? If you think about minimizing the impact on your health, consider having that drink while you take a walk. Consider going for a walk, doing some sort of cardio exercise, starting 30 minutes after you take that first bite. It doesn't completely nullify the effect now, but it does something at least. Okay. Anybody have any other questions about that whole process of how sugar that we eat ends up in our blood and then can turn into fat, which can be harmful ultimately? I'll add on to that we made this distinction between the free and added sugars on one hand and the whole food sugars. And so this question that we discussed on the daily wellness text thread on Monday, this question really got at whether you understood the difference between whole food sugars and added sugars. So let's just test it. What whole foods can sweeten smoothies that you buy or that you make? Select all that apply. So I'm going to read out potential options, and you're basically telling me, is this a whole food sugar or not? Fresh fruit, whole food sugar or not? Lisa
Whole
J
food.
says,
Whole foods.
yes. I hear a chorus of yeses, and Lisa J says yes. You are great with the emojis, Miss Lisa. Okay. Yes, whole food sugar because it's in its natural form. It's in the food along with all of the nutrients that it was built with. All of these nutrients like fiber, like the phytonutrients, like flavonoids, for example, that actually help our bodies reduce the chances of a sugar spike. Okay, what about frozen food? Whole food sugar or not?
As long as no syrup has been added, it's a whole food.
Hey, wow, I'm impressed. Okay, Miss Bridget, I wasn't even thinking about that, but that's such a good point. So frozen fruit is essentially the same in nutrient content as fresh fruit, as long as there's been no syrup added. So you want to look at that package when you're in the frozen food section and you grab, say, frozen blueberries or mixed berries or the mangoes or pineapples or whatever to have a delicious smoothie. you want to make sure on the ingredients list that the only thing on the ingredients is that fruit. I wouldn't even necessarily tell you to look at the front label because that can be misleading. It can say 100% fruit. It can say no sugar added. It can say all natural. And that doesn't truly tell you what the ingredients are. So look at that list. And if you're buying blueberries, you should only see blueberries. You shouldn't see sugar. You shouldn't see syrup. You shouldn't see anything. There shouldn't even be water added, right? Okay. So the next option on the list for a whole food sugar is fruit juice a whole food sugar or not?
Not.
Not. You guys are on point. I know that you know a lot, and some of you, we've been having these conversations for the last year, and you were just on top of it. But some of you are new, and you're still getting these answers right. I'm so impressed. Fruit juice is not a whole food sugar because the process of juicing is processing, right? So we call this a free sugar as opposed to an added sugar because it's sugar that was naturally found in a fruit, but it's been kind of liberated and refined a little bit in that when you juice a fruit, you lose that fiber that we talked about that helps to control the blood sugar and keep it from spiking as much. So that's not to say like, oh, fruit juice, you should never drink any of it, right? But because that's not what we're doing with any of these options. I'm not telling you what to do or what not to do, but just know that fruit juice will spike the blood sugar more than eating fresh fruit or frozen fruit in the same quantity. It also, by the way, is more likely to give more calories without actually filling you up. So it's one of those really easy ways, if you are watching your weight, one of those really easy ways to go a little bit too far over your calorie limit and not get a whole lot of satisfaction out of it because you won't be full. Okay, so fruit juice is a free sugar because it's still a food that stands alone, right? It's not a food additive like our added sugars. Speaking of, the next option, next question for you guys is agave syrup a whole food sugar or not?
Not.
Not. I see
Not.
no listed. I hear not. Excellent. Okay, is agave syrup a free sugar or an added sugar? This is like a bonus question.
Free sugar.
Free sugar.
I hear free sugar, but guess what, guys? This is technically an added sugar because if you think about fruit juice as a free sugar, it's a food product, right? You can drink the juice independently. It has significant nutrients beyond just the sugar, even if it's lost a lot of its fiber. The added sugars are really just a food additive. Like you're probably not going to drink the agave syrup on your own. It's just you're gonna add it to other foods to make them sweeter or to drinks to make it sweeter. So for that reason, agave syrup and other types of syrup are really added sugars. Okay. I'm glad we had a learning point there because you guys are just, I thought I didn't have anything left to teach you. Okay. The last question, and a lot of people get tripped up on this one, but I think you guys will be okay. Is honey a whole food sugar or not?
Not.
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 I hear some nods. I see a yes. I can imagine why you might think so. And in fact, if you were to Google this right now, you would see conflicting results in Google. So here's why some people call honey a whole food sugar. And let me, before that, I'm going to say my answer is that honey is not a whole food sugar and that honey is an added sugar because we do not eat honey out of the jar, right? We add it to things to sweeten. So it's an additive. The reason why some people call honey a whole food sugar is that it does have some valuable nutrients. It actually does contain some of the phytonutrients that can help your body manage the honey. If you have honey that has like the hive still in it, like it's got that wax in it, then you might actually be a lot closer to a whole food sugar. But for most of the honey that we eat, even even what's called raw honey that you might buy in a store or get from a farm,
Sure.
it's missing the hive. So when we said what we said about like cane sugar, right? It's natural sugar, but it's been refined. The sucrose, the table sugar on your table, it comes from a cane. The whole food version of that sugar would be the cane, right? If you were to eat the cane, just take a bite of it, cut off a piece of it, you'd be getting the fiber from that cane. It would be really hard to bite through, probably, a lot of cellulose, and you'd be getting the sugar. But instead, what you get in the granules that you use in table sugar, what you get is just the concentrated sugar. And so in honey, what we get is the concentrated sugar. The whole food version of honey would be grabbing a piece of the hive and eating all of that extra fat. There's a lot of fat there. And really hard to get through if you've had the honey with the wax in it. And I think potentially there may be even a little bit of protein. But you basically, in order to make honey a whole food sugar, you'd be eating the hive, right? Not just the concentrated sugar. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. And then Miss Lisa says, "Uh-oh, I have been known to take a spoonful of honey." That's funny. I mean, look, it's possible that for some people, honey is not just an additive, especially, you might have heard from grandma or mom, if you're feeling sick, maybe you take a teaspoon of honey. Definitely heard that. So, all right. But now you guys understand. So honey is generally going to spike the blood sugar more than, say, an apple or some frozen berries. And that's something that we just sort of keep in mind. Doesn't mean that you can't take your spoonful of honey, and maybe even go for a walk after you do it. All right. So, for the rest of the week in the text, we're going to talk about glycemic index and glycemic load. And I think we'll carry this discussion over until next week, where we can do a full exercise trying to understand, so how do you tell sugars and refined carbohydrates from each other? Because they're not all the same. And did I hear someone volunteer something? or
I
ask
said,
a
excuse
question?
me. No.
Okay. Well, I would just love to know, as I prepare for next week with you guys, do you know what glycemic index and glycemic load are? We'll figure out where we need to start with those definitions.
Have an idea, but it may be a little hazy.
Okay. Okay, cool. So we'll just start from scratch with those. We're coming up on like the last 3 minutes, and I know we went over last time, so I don't want to push you guys too far. But glycemic index, and I'll tell you this in case you decide to do a little bit of your own reading in the meantime. But glycemic index measures the rate with which, or the rate at which the carbohydrate spikes your blood sugar. So that spike we were talking about that tells your body, oh, I've got tons of energy. Either feed me to the muscles if muscles need me right now because they're moving, or feed me to the liver to turn me into fat and store me as fuel. So that spike is actually measured, has been measured for a bunch of different foods, and it's given a value, a numbers attached to it to tell us in relation to glucose, 50 grams of glucose, which is how sugar shows up in our blood. It's all broken down to glucose. Compared to that load, how much do things like bananas and strawberries and watermelon and rice and bread, how much do those things spike our blood sugar compared to that glucose load? And then you get this spectrum of foods where there are the foods down below, like blueberries, for example. A lot of berries have a low glycemic index where they are really not likely to spike your blood sugar. And then higher up, you've got your juices, you've got your sucrose or your table sugar that we talked about. And then somewhere in the middle, you have a lot of your other foods, from refined carbohydrates to even whole grains. And so that's glycemic index. And then glycemic load says, all right, we know the rate of the spike, right? Is it just creeping up? Is the sugar creeping up in the blood, or is it spiking really high? And glycemic load says, let's multiply that rate by how many carbs are actually in the food. And so it gives you more of an objective sense of how much of a load this is to my system. And so we'll talk about that, because there are ways to explain why foods like watermelon might have higher glycemic index. They might be more likely to spike your sugar high, but they have a very low glycemic load because they're so filled with water. They don't have very many carbohydrates. They don't actually have much sugar per 50 gram serving. So why foods like even the sweeter fruits tend to be considered healthier than, say, a piece of white bread or Coca-Cola. So we'll talk about all that stuff. Is this helpful for you guys to kind of go through examples? You feel like you're learning?
Yes.
Yes,
Yes.
very
Okay.
helpful.
Good,
Yes.
good. Well, that is our time then. I'm going to make sure to give you some good examples for this glycemic index and glycemic load for next week. In the meantime, I want you guys, you'll expect an email from me this week reminding you to sign up for that 20-minute call with me. If you have not already, we can talk for 20 minutes about your wellness goals, how to set them, get you started on the path to reaching them. And very shortly, you're going to hear about the Wellness Reset course that's going to be coming out soon. I'm really excited for you guys to get that. Okay. Meanwhile, happy, healthy living. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you. Have a great week.
Bye. Thank you.